A human signal echoes through an empty communications channel, an unsettling breath against the cold silence of space. The alien fleet, crippled by humanity's pulse, is thrown into chaos as they attempt to decode this strange occurrence. And then the stars themselves seem to shift. Qatar's knuckles turned white as he gripped the console. The air in the command deck was suffocating, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a vice. The alien fleet had been crippled. The pulse, that strange, deadly force unleashed from Earth, had torn through their technology with brutal efficiency. They were a fleet adrift, their weapons useless, their communication channels dead, and now, as if mocking their helplessness, something new had emerged. A signal. It had started as a whisper, barely audible through the static of their damaged systems, but it was unmistakable. A voice, a human voice, breathed through the dead channel, cutting through the silence of space. A steady, rhythmic breathing, filling the once-empty void. Qatar's eyes flicked to the officer monitoring the comms. "What is this?" His voice was a low growl, barely contained. The officer's face was pale, his fingers shaking as they typed in a desperate attempt to stabilize the signal. "It's coming from Earth, Commander. But there's nothing here to explain it. It's human." Qatar finished the officer's sentence for him, his voice cold with disbelief. "Impossible. They can't even comprehend our technology, yet they managed to send us this breath, this message." The officer didn't respond. He just stared at the screen, which continued to display the bizarre, rhythmic pulse of a breath on the channel, an eerie echo that seemed to vibrate through the room. Qatar's mind raced. The signal was a taunt. It was deliberate, a mockery of their powerlessness. Earth was denying everything, refusing to acknowledge their involvement in the pulse that had devastated the fleet. Now, they were sending a signal. Not a threat, but something far worse, a reminder of their silence, of their complete disregard for the consequences. "Get me a direct line to Earth's comms," Qatar snapped, his voice rising in fury. "I want to hear it, all of it." The officer nodded, quickly working to patch the fleet's communications through to Earth. The breath continued to echo in the background, a soft, unsettling sound, growing louder as if it was deliberately pushing back against their efforts. Minutes passed, but to Qatar it felt like hours. The pulse was still alive, vibrating through his fleet's fractured systems. He had no answers, no clarity, just this strange breathing sound, as though Earth itself was exhaling into the cold darkness of space, daring them to make the next move. "We've got it, Commander," the officer said at last, his voice thin with exhaustion. "Earth is refusing to acknowledge the signal. No response. Nothing but silence." Qatar's lips curled into a bitter smile. "They think they can ignore us, that their silence will protect them." How quaint. He stepped away from the console, his mind working furiously. The pulse was growing. It had started as a mere tremor, something that could be brushed aside. But now it was a force, and this signal, this strange breathing, was not just a message, it was something else, something deeper. But what? And why now? A sharp beep from the console cut through his thoughts. The screen blinked, displaying a new data stream, coordinates, a location. Earth was not just sending a signal anymore, they were directing it. Qatar's eyes widened. "No," he muttered. "This is no longer just a message. They've pointed us to something. They want us to find it." "Commander," Drax's voice echoed from the doorway, urgent and tense. "The stars, they're shifting." Qatar turned to face him, his heart skipping a beat. "What are you talking about?" Drax pointed to the viewport, his face pale as he stared at the starry expanse outside. The stars were no longer in their familiar positions. They had moved. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, but it was happening. The stars were shifting, as if some force, was pulling them out of alignment. "They're changing," Qatar said, his voice soft with disbelief. "Impossible." The officer working at the sensors confirmed it, his face a mirror of confusion. "The gravitational patterns, they're fluctuating. We've never seen anything like this. The stars, some of them are moving. It's as if the pulse is not just affecting our technology, but space itself." Qatar's mind reeled. The pulse had already shown itself to be more than a weapon. Now it was warping reality, bending the laws of physics. And Earth was at the center of it. The signal, the breathing sound, the shifting stars, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. "The pulse is alive," Qatar whispered, his voice thick with dread. "It's not just a weapon. It's something far worse. Earth has unleashed a force that even they cannot control." The thought hung in the air like a dark cloud. If Earth had truly awakened something this powerful, something capable of shifting, the stars themselves, there was no telling where this would lead. Qatar turned to the officer at the console, his voice now a low growl. "Prepare the fleet. We're going to Earth, and we're taking everything from them, every secret, every last answer." As the fleet began to power up for the final descent, Qatar stood still, his thoughts racing. This was no longer a simple mission. The pulse had become the catalyst for something far bigger, something that was already beyond their understanding, and that was before Earth even responded. Qatar stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the view of Earth through the massive observation window. His heart beat steadily in his chest, but his mind raced with confusion and mounting fear. The pulse had done its damage. It had shattered their fleet, paralyzed their most advanced technologies, and now it was twisting the very fabric of space itself. Earth had unknowingly, and perhaps unknowingly, opened a door to something far beyond their comprehension. "Commander!" Drax's voice broke through the silence, sharp with urgency. "The star patterns are becoming more erratic. This isn't just a ripple in space. It's a distortion. We can't explain it, but something is pulling at the stars themselves. The pulse. It's moving through the galaxy." Qatar's jaw tightened. He'd expected a threat from Earth, but not this. This was something different, something far more dangerous. The stars shifting, the pulse growing in strength, the strange signal still echoing through the communications channels. All of it pointed to one thing. Earth had inadvertently triggered a force that even the Council's most advanced minds couldn't grasp. And now they were racing against time to stop it. "We can't ignore this," Qatar said quietly, turning toward his officers. "The pulse is moving outward. It's not just affecting our fleet, it's spreading across the galaxy, and if it continues, it could reach every corner of known space." "Commander, we've tried everything," one of the officers reported, his voice tinged with frustration. "We've rerouted power, rebooted systems, tried to isolate the pulse, but it's like it's feeding off our technology. Every time we try to stop it, it just grows stronger." Qatar's eyes narrowed. "The humans, what have they done?" He paused, running a hand over his brow. He knew the pulse was no accident, but the mystery of how it had grown so powerful was beyond him. He had underestimated Earth, and now they were paying the price. He had no answers, but he couldn't afford to waste time searching for them. Whatever had been unleashed on Earth had spread too quickly. The alien fleet was already on the edge of collapse, and if the pulse continued to grow unchecked, the entire galaxy could be at risk. "Set a course for Earth," Qatar ordered. His voice was steady, but his insides churned with dread. "We will find the source of this. We can't afford to let it spread further." The fleet moved into position, its remaining functional ships aligning behind Qatar's flagship. As they entered the orbit of Earth, Qatar felt the weight of his decision. The humans had triggered the pulse, and now they would answer for it. He wasn't sure how yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Earth had become the center of a galactic crisis. On Earth, the pulse continued to spread, a force of nature that Laura Carson had never intended to unleash. She sat at her lab console, staring at the flickering data streaming across her screens. She had thought her experiment was simple, a way to manipulate gravity for interstellar travel, but instead, she had created something much worse, something far more powerful than she could control. The pulse had started small, just a disturbance, but it had grown exponentially, spreading across the planet, then outward, like a ripple on the surface of a pond. Now, it was feeding on their technology, twisting their systems into a chaotic mess. "Laura, the systems are failing again," Raj said, his voice strained with the same anxiety that gripped her. "We've lost contact with several of the military units. The pulse, it's tearing through everything." "I know," Laura said quietly, her voice hollow. She didn't have an answer. The pulse had grown too powerful, and now she was too far from any kind of solution. The aliens had felt it, and she knew they were coming. She could only hope that they hadn't yet figured out how to control it. But hope was fading. The pulse was no longer just a force that damaged their technology. It was warping reality itself. The strange signal, the breathing sound that had echoed through space, was not the only consequence of her experiment. There was something else happening, something deeper that she couldn't explain. The stars were shifting. The very fabric of space was beginning to bend. It was as though the universe itself was responding to the pulse. Laura felt her stomach churn. "They're coming," she whispered. "The aliens." Raj turned sharply toward her. "What are we supposed to do now? We have no military, no defense. We're sitting ducks. We need to control it," Laura said, her voice a mix of determination and desperation. "The pulse. If we can find the source and stabilize it, we might be able to use it to stop them." Raj shook his head, his expression incredulous. "Control it? We don't even know what it is. We don't know how it works." "I know," she replied, her gaze fixed on the screen. "But we have to try. The aliens will come for the pulse. They'll either try to destroy it or take control of it themselves. We can't let them do that. If they understand what it is, they'll use it to wipe us out. If they haven't already figured it out, we need to stop them before they do." Raj seemed to hesitate, then nodded, albeit reluctantly. "Okay. But what do we do first?" Laura exhaled slowly. "First, we need to find the epicenter of the pulse. We can't stop it if we don't understand where it's coming from. If we can't control it, at least we can isolate it. We need to be ready. We need to fix this before it's too late." Qatar's fleet hovered just outside Earth's orbit. The strange pulse continued to ripple outward, distorting the very fabric of space. And now the stars themselves seemed to be responding. As Qatar stared at the flickering lights on his console, the image of Earth growing larger in his mind's eye, he felt the creeping sensation of doubt that he had tried to suppress. He had underestimated the humans. But now, with every passing moment, he realized the extent of the threat they had unwittingly unleashed. The pulse was a force beyond their control. And if they didn't find its source soon, the galaxy might not survive its full awakening. He turned to Drax. "Prepare the ground team, we're going in." Drax nodded. "Understood, we'll take them by surprise." The moment Qatar stepped down from the command deck and into the shuttle bay, a deep breath filled his chest. Earth was no longer the helpless target he'd thought it was, and if he didn't act fast, the entire galaxy might burn from the very force they had overlooked. As Qatar's ships began their descent toward Earth's surface, the pulse grew stronger, the stars in the sky shifting in ways that defied understanding. And that was before Earth even responded. Qatar's shuttle glided silently through the Earth's atmosphere, the ship's hull vibrating ever so slightly as it cut through the air. The planet below seemed peaceful, its blue oceans and green land masses swirling beneath a white cloud cover. But Qatar knew better. This was no longer a peaceful world. It had become the epicenter of a force that could destabilize the entire galaxy. The pulse had begun as a ripple, an anomaly, but it had quickly turned into something far more insidious, spreading across space, tearing through their fleet, and now it was beginning to warp the fabric of reality itself. Qatar's fingers drummed against the armrest, the steady rhythm betraying the calm exterior he was trying to maintain. His thoughts churned. The more he studied the pulse, the more it seemed like a living thing, evolving and adapting to their every attempt to understand it. Earth had sent it, whether intentionally or not, and now they would pay the price for their ignorance. He had underestimated the humans. The arrogance of the Council, dismissing them as little more than a nuisance, was now painfully evident, but it was too late for regret. What mattered now was finding the source and neutralizing it before it could escalate further. As the shuttle neared the surface, the once familiar landscape of Earth took on an alien quality. The air seemed charged, alive with the pulse that had begun its rampage across the planet. The atmosphere crackled with energy, and the skies above the facility they had located, where the pulse seemed to originate, were filled with strange, shifting lights. The pulse was warping space itself. The stars were no longer where they should be. "Commander," Drax's voice crackled through the comms, his tone filled with concern. "We're approaching the facility. There's something strange going on. The pulse is intensifying," Qatar finished, his voice low. "I know." The shuttle began its descent, cutting through the atmosphere with precision, the landing gear extending beneath them. Qatar's heart quickened. They were about to land in the heart of this anomaly, the very place where the pulse had first manifested. The location seemed to have been intentionally hidden, shielded from direct observation, but the closer they got, the more it became clear that Earth had been hiding something much worse than they realized. The shuttle touched down. With a soft jolt, the noise of the engines fading as the craft settled into the soil. The landing ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, and Qatar stood, his boots hitting the ground with a firm thud. The air was thick, heavy with static, and he could feel it in his bones. The pulse was here, and it was stronger than anything they had ever faced. The ground team, elite soldiers trained for this exact moment, filed out behind him, weapons at the ready. But Qatar knew that no amount of firepower would stop what they were up against now. This wasn't a battle of guns and ships. This was something far more dangerous, an uncontrollable force, a living, breathing anomaly that could bend the laws of nature itself. "Commander," one of the soldiers called out, his voice tight with uncertainty. "There's a structure ahead. It looks strange, different from anything we've seen before." Qatar's gaze followed the soldier's outstretched hand to the facility ahead. It was unlike anything the Council had built. The architecture was alien, organic in design, with twisting, curved surfaces that seemed to pulse with energy. The walls glowed faintly, and the structure itself seemed to ripple with the same energy that had crippled their fleet. "Move out," Qatar ordered, his voice steady, despite the rising tension in his chest. "We don't have time to waste." The team moved forward, navigating through the uneven terrain toward the facility. The pulse seemed to grow stronger with each step, the air around them crackling with energy. The closer they got, the more Qatar felt the weight of the unknown pressing in on him. Whatever was inside that facility, whatever had triggered this pulse, was beyond their understanding. But they had no choice now. They had to find it. They had to end it. As they reached the entrance, Qatar's hand hovered over the door controls. The walls of the facility seemed to be alive, responding to their presence with a soft hum. The pulse was emanating from within, feeding on the very energy of the building. "Prepare yourselves," Qatar muttered, a sense of dread settling in. We're about to find out exactly what we've been dealing with. The doors slid open with a low hiss, revealing a darkened corridor inside. The pulse was palpable now, a living presence that seemed to wrap around them, suffocating and all-consuming. They stepped forward into the unknown. As Qatar and his team moved deeper into the facility, a feeling of unease settled over them. The walls pulsed with light, and the air felt thicker, heavier, as though the very space around them was warping under the influence of the pulse. There were no signs of human life, no indication of who had built this place or why, but the deeper they ventured, the more they realized that they were not alone. "Commander?" Drax's voice broke through the tension, his voice a whisper of dread. "This isn't a facility, it's something else. It's—" Before he could finish, a low, resonating hum filled the room, and Qatar's heart skipped a beat. The pulse was alive. It was reacting to them. And then everything went dark. The last thing Qatar heard before the darkness consumed him was the sound of breathing. The same rhythmic breath that had haunted the communication channels. The pulse was watching them, and the stars shifted once more. Qatar's eyes snapped open, his head pounding with disorientation. The darkness enveloped him, but the air around him was thick, almost alive with energy. He pushed himself up, his senses reeling as he tried to make sense of the silence that had taken over. His team was still scattered around him, their forms barely visible in the dim light that pulsed from the walls. The pulse was still present, stronger than ever, vibrating through the very air and ground beneath him. The hum was no longer just a subtle echo. It was the heartbeat of the facility itself. Qatar's mind raced, trying to connect the dots. The stars had shifted, the pulse had grown, and now, here he was, in the heart of it all. "Commander," Drax's voice broke through the fog in Qatar's mind, shaky and tense. What happened?" Qatar shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. The last thing he remembered was entering the facility, the walls of the strange organic building, seeming to react to their presence, and then the darkness, the hum, the breathing. It was as though the very pulse had enveloped them, pulling them into a deeper state of awareness. The ground around them trembled slightly, and the walls pulsed again, a low, rhythmic thrum that seemed to sync with Qatar's own heartbeat. The pulse wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a force of nature, a living, breathing entity. "We're not alone," Qatar muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the room. His voice was barely a whisper, but the gravity of his words hit like a wave. "This isn't a facility. It's a conduit. This place is alive." A crackling noise filled the air, followed by the sound of heavy breathing. It was the same as the signal they had received through their comms. A slow, steady intake of air, punctuated by a brief exhale, as though whatever it was trying to understand them, to communicate. Qatar felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end as the hum grew louder, reverberating through his bones. The pulse was no longer a distant threat. It was here, with them. "We need to move," Drax urged, his voice laced with urgency. "This place, it's not what we thought." "We're being pulled in," Qatar nodded, the dread in his gut growing stronger. Every step they took seemed to bring them closer to something they couldn't comprehend, something beyond their control. They had come to Earth to stop a threat. Now it was clear. The pulse wasn't just a weapon, it was a living, conscious entity that could reshape the universe around it, and Earth had awakened it. Qatar's fingers clenched into fists. "We came here to end this," he said, his voice cold with determination. "But now, it seems we've only scratched the surface." As they moved deeper into the facility, the pulse resonated through every wall, every corner, and with every step, Qatar felt its presence closing in around them. There was no turning back now. They had disturbed something ancient, something powerful, but they couldn't afford to be intimidated. If they didn't act now, the entire galaxy could be at risk. "To you," Walls shimmered and began to shift before their eyes. The facility seemed to change, adapting to their presence. And then Qatar saw it. At the center of the room, a massive structure began to emerge from the floor. It was alien but familiar. It was as though the pulse had been waiting for them to arrive, waiting for the final key to unlock its true potential. Qatar took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with a quiet fear. Prepare yourselves. This is it. The stars above, unseen but felt, shifted once more. And as the entity at the center of the room began to open, Qatar understood one thing. Earth had not just sent a signal. They had unleashed a force capable of changing everything, and that was before Earth even responded.